Plant lore, legends, and lyrics. Embracing the myths, traditions, superstitions, and folklore of the plant kingdom. By Richard Folkard. 1884. Chapter 12. Plants connected with birds and animals. The association of trees and birds has been the theme of the most ancient writers. The skalds have sung how an eagle sat in stately majesty on the topmost branch of Yggdrasil, whilst the keen-eyed hawk hovered around. The Vedas record how the pippala of the Hindu paradise was daily visited by two beauteous birds, one of which fed from its celestial food, whilst its companion poured forth delicious melody from its reed-like throat. On the summit of the mystic soma tree were perched two birds, the one engaged in expressing the immortalizing soma juice, the other feeding on the figs which hung from the branches of the sacred tree. A bird, bearing in its beak a twig plucked from its favorite tree, admonished the patriarch Noah that the waters of the flood were subsiding from the deluged world. In olden times there appears to have been a notion that in some cases plants could not be germinated excepting through the direct intervention of birds. Thus Bacon tells us of a tradition, current in his day, that a bird, called a missel bird, fed upon a seed which, being unable to digest, she evacuated whole, and that this seed, falling upon boughs of trees, put forth the mistletoe. A similar story is told by Tavernier of the nutmeg. It is observable, he says, that the nutmeg tree is never planted. This has been attested to me by several persons who have resided many years in the islands of Banda. I have been assured that when the nuts are ripe, there come certain birds from the islands that lie towards the south, who swallow them down whole, and evacuate them whole likewise, without ever having digested them. These nuts being then covered with a viscous and glutinous matter, when they fall on the ground, take root, vegetate, and produce a tree, which would not grow from them if they were planted like other trees. The Druids, dwelling as they did in groves and forests, frequented by birds and animals, were adepts at interpreting the meaning of their actions and sounds. A knowledge of the language of the bird and animal kingdoms was deemed by them a marvelous gift, which was only to be imparted to the priestess who should be fortunate enough to tread under foot the mystic seligo, or golden herb. At a time when men had no almanac to warn them of the changing of the seasons, no calendar to guide them in the planting of their fields and gardens, the arrival and departure of birds helped to direct them in the cultivation of plants. So we find Ecclesiastes preached, "A bird of the air shall carry the voice." And in modern times the popular saying arose of, "A little bird has told me." This notion of the birds imparting knowledge is prettily rendered by Hans Christian Andersen, in his story of the fir tree, where the sapling wonders what is done with the trees taken out of the wood at Christmas time. "Ah, we know," twittered the sparrows, "for we have looked in at the windows in yonder town." Dr. Solander tells us that the peasants of Upland remark that, when you see the wheatear you may sow your grain. For in this country there is seldom any severe frost after the wheatear appears, and the shepherds of Salisbury Plain say, when dotterel do first appear, it shows that frost is very near, but when the dotterel do go, then you may look for heavy snow. Aristophanes makes one of his characters say that in former times the kite ruled the Greeks, his meaning being that in ancient days the kite was looked upon as the sign of spring and of the necessity of commencing active work in field and garden. And again, the crow points out the time for sowing when she flies croaking to Libya. In another place he notices that the cuckoo in like manner governed Phoenicia and Egypt, because when it cried cuckoo, cuckoo, it was considered time to reap the wheat and barley fields. In our own country, this welcome harbinger of the springtide has been associated with a number of vernal plants. We have the cuckoo flower, Lychnis floscuculi, cuckoo's bread or meat, and cuckoo's sorrel, Oxalis acidocella. Cuckoo grass, Lazula campestris, and Shakespeare's cuckoo buds of yellow hue, which are thought to be the buds of the crowfoot, Ranunculus. The association in the popular rhyme of the cuckoo with the cherry tree is explained by an old superstition that before it ceases its song, the cuckoo must eat 3 good meals of cherries. In Sussex, the whitethorn is called the cuckoo's bread and cheese tree, and an old proverb runs, "When the cuckoo comes to the bare thorn, Then sell your cow and buy your corn. Mr. Parrish has remarked that it is singular this name should be given to the whitethorn, as among all Aryan nations the tree is associated with lightning, and the cuckoo is connected with the lightning gods Jupiter and Thor. Pliny relates that the halcyon, or kingfisher, at breeding time, foretold calm and settled weather. The belief in the wisdom of birds obtained such an ascendancy over men's minds, that we find at length no affair of moment was entered upon without consulting them. Thus came in augury, by which was meant a forewarning of future events derived from prophetic birds. One of these systems of divinations, for the purpose of discovering some secret or future event, was effected by means of a cock and grains of barley, in the following manner: the 24 letters of the alphabet having been written in the dust, upon each letter was laid a grain of barley, and a cock, over which previous incantations had been uttered, was let loose among them, those letters off which it pecked the barley, being joined together, were then believed to declare the word of which they were in search. The magician Jamblichus, desirous to find out who should succeed Valens in the imperial purple, made use of this divination, but the cock only picked up 4 grains, viz., those which lay upon the Greek letters Theod, so that it was uncertain whether Theodosius, Theodotus, Theodorus, or Theodectes, was the person designed by the fates. Valens, when informed of the matter, was so terribly enraged that he put several persons to death simply because their names began with these letters. When, however, he proceeded to make search after the magicians themselves, Jamblichus put an end to his majesty's life by a dose of poison, and he was succeeded by Theodosius in the empire of the East. The loves of the nightingale and the rose have formed a favorite topic of Eastern poets. In a fragment by the celebrated Persian poet Atar, entitled Bulbul Nami, the Book of the Nightingale, all the birds appear before Solomon, and charge the nightingale with disturbing their rest by the broken and plaintive strains which he warbles forth in a sort of frenzy and intoxication. The nightingale is summoned, questioned, and acquitted by the wise king, because the bird assures him that his vehement love for the rose drives him to distraction, and causes him to break forth into those languishing and touching complaints which are laid to his charge. Thus the Persians believe that the nightingale in spring flutters around the rose bushes, uttering incessant complaints, till, overpowered by the strong scent, he drops stupefied to the ground. The impassioned bird makes his appearance in eastern climes at the season when the rose begins to blow, hence the legend that the beauteous flower bursts forth from its bud at the song of its ravished adorer. The Persian poet Jami says, "The nightingales warbled their enchanting notes and rent the thin veils of the rosebud and the rose," and Moore has sung, "Oh, sooner shall the rose of May mistake her own sweet nightingale, and to some meaner minstrels lay, open her bosom's glowing veil, than love shall ever doubt a tone, a breath, of the beloved one." And in another place, the author of Lalla Rookh asks, "Though rich the spot, with every flower the earth hath got, what is it to the nightingale, if there his darling rose is not?" Lord Byron has alluded to this pretty conceit in the Giaour, when he sings, "The rose over crag or vale, sultana of the nightingale, the maid for whom his melody, his thousand songs are heard on high, blooms blushing to her lover's tale, his queen, the garden queen, his rose, unbent by winds, unchilled by snows." From the verses of the poet Jami may be learnt how the first rose appeared in Gulistan at the time when the flowers, dissatisfied with the reign of the torpid lotus, who would slumber at night, demanded a new sovereign from Allah. At first the rose queen was snowy white, and guarded by a protecting circlet of thorns, but the amorous nightingale fell into such a transport of love over her charms, and so recklessly pressed his ravished heart against the cruel thorns, that his blood trickling into the lovely blossom's bosom, dyed it crimson, and, in corroboration of this, the poet demands, "Are not the petals white at the extremity where the poor little bird's blood could not reach?" Perhaps this Eastern poetic legend may have given rise to the belief, which has long been entertained, that the nightingale usually sleeps on, or with its bosom against, a thorn, under the impression that in such a painful situation it must remain awake. Young, in his Night Thoughts, thus refers to this curious idea. Grief's sharpest thorn hard pressing on my breast, I share with wakeful melody to cheer, the sullen gloom, sweet Philomel. Like thee. And call the stars to listen. And in Thomson's Hymn to May, we find this allusion. The lowly nightingale, a thorn her pillow, trills her doleful tale. In a sonnet by Sir Philip Sidney, afterward set to music by Bateson, we read. The nightingale, as soon as April bringeth, unto her rested sense a perfect waking, when late bare earth, proud of new clothing, springeth, sings out her woes, a thorn her songbook making. And mournfully bewailing, her throat in tunes expresseth, while grief her heart oppresseth, for tears o'er her chaste will prevailing. Shakespeare notices the story in the following quaint lines. Everything did banish moan, save the nightingale alone, she, poor bird, as all forlorn, leaned her breast up till a thorn, and then sung the doleful ditty, that to hear it was great pity. In Yorkshire, there is a tradition of hops having been planted many years ago, near Doncaster, and of the nightingale making its first appearance there about the same time. The popular idea was, that between the bird and the plant some mysterious connecting link existed. Be this as it may, both the hops and the nightingale disappeared long ago. It is not alone the nightingale that has a legendary connection with a thorn. Another favorite denizen of our groves may also lay claim to this distinction, inasmuch as, according to a tradition current in Brittany, its red breast was originally produced by the laceration of an historic thorn. In this story it is said that, whilst our Saviour was bearing his cross on the way to Calvary, a little bird, struck with compassion at his sufferings, flew suddenly to him, and plucked from his bleeding brow one of the cruel thorns of his mocking crown, steeped in his blood. In bearing it away in its beak, drops of the divine blood fell upon the little bird's breast, and dyed its plumage red, so that ever since the redbreast has been treated as the friend of man, and is studiously protected by him from harm. Whether or no this legend of the origin of our little friend's red breast formerly influenced mankind in its favor, it is certain that the robin has always been regarded with tenderness. Popular tradition, even earlier than the date of the story of the children in the wood, has made him our sexton with the aid of plants. No burial this pretty pair, of any man receives, till Robin Redbreast, painfully, did cover them with leaves. It is noted in Gray's Shakespeare that, according to the oldest traditions, if the robin finds the dead body of a human being, he will cover the face at least with moss and leaves. Co veering with moss the dead's unclosed eye, the little redbreast teacheth charity. Drayton's Owl. The wren is also credited with employing plants for acts of similar charity. In Reed's old plays, we read, call for the robin redbreast and the wren, since o'er shady groves they hover, and with leaves and flowers do cover, the friendless bodies of unburied men. A writer in one of our popular periodicals gives another quaint quotation expressive of the tradition, from Stafford's Niobe dissolved into a Nilus, on her, the nightingale, smiles Robin in his red livery, who sits as a coroner on the murthered man, and seeing his body naked, plays the sorry tailor to make him a mossy raiment. The missel or mistle thrush is sometimes called the mistletoe thrush, because it feeds upon mistletoe berries. Lord Bacon, in Silva Silvarum, refers, as already noted, to an old belief that the seeds of mistletoe will not vegetate unless they have passed through the stomach of this bird. The peony is said to cure epilepsy, if certain ceremonies are duly observed. A patient, however, must on no account taste the root, if a woodpecker should happen to be in sight, or he will be certain to be stricken with blindness. Among the many magical properties ascribed to the springwurzel, springwort, or, as it is sometimes called, the blasting root, is its power to reveal treasures. But this it can only do through the instrumentality of a bird, which is usually a green or black woodpecker, according to Pliny, also the raven, in Switzerland, the hoopoe, in the Tyrol, the swallow. In order to become possessed of a root of this magical plant, arrangements must be made with much care and circumspection, and the bird closely watched. When the old bird has temporarily left its nest, access to it must be stopped up by plugging the hole with wood. The bird, finding this, will fly away in search of the springwort, and returning, will open the nest by touching the obstruction with the mystic root. Meanwhile a fire or a red cloth must be spread out closely, which will so startle the bird, that it will let the root fall from its bills, and it can thus be secured. Pliny relates of the woodpecker, that the hen bird brings up her young in holes, and if the entrance be plugged up, no matter how securely, the old bird is able to force out the plug with an explosion caused by the plant. Aubrey confounds the moonwort with the springwort. He says, Sir Benet Hoskins, Baronet, told me that his keeper at his park at Moorhampton, in Herefordshire, did, for experiment's sake, drive an iron nail thwart the hole of the woodpecker's nest, there being a tradition that the dam will bring some leaf to open it. He laid at the bottom of the tree a clean sheet, and before many hours passed, the nail came out, and he found a leaf lying by it on the sheet. They say the moonwort will do such things. Tradition tells us of a certain magical herb called cora, which was also known as the herba meropes, or plant of the merops, a bird which the Germans were familiar with under the name of Baumhechel or Baumhacker, woodpecker. This bird builds its nest in high trees, but should anyone cover the young brood with something which prevents the parent bird from visiting the nest, it flies off in search of a herb. This is brought in the merop's beak, and held over the obstacle till it falls off or gives way. In Swabia, the springwort is regarded as a plant embodying electricity or lightning, but the hoopoe takes the place of the woodpecker in employing the herb for blasting and removing offensive obstacles. The Swabians, however, instead of a red cloth, place a pail of water, or kindle a fire, as the hoopoe, wishing to destroy the springwort, after using it, drops it either into fire or water. It is related of the hoopoe, that one of these birds had a nest in an old wall in which there was a crevice. The proprietor, noticing the cleft in the wall, had it stopped up with plaster during the hoopoe's absence, so that when the poor bird returned to feed her young, she found that it was impossible to get to her nest. Thereupon she flew off in quest of a plant called poa, thought to be sainfoin or lucerne, and, having found a spray, returned and applied it to the plaster, which instantly fell from the crevice, and allowed the hoopoe ingress to her nest. Twice again did the owner plaster up the rent in his wall. And twice again did the persistent and sagacious bird apply the magic poa with successful results. In Piedmont there grows a little plant which, as stated in a previous chapter, bears the name of the herb of the Blessed Mary. This plant is known to the birds as being fatal when eaten, hence, when their young are stolen from them and imprisoned in cages, the parent birds, in order that death may release them from their life of bondage, gather a spray of this herb and carry it in their beaks to their imprisoned children. The connection between the dove and the olive has been set forth for all time in the Bible narrative of Noah and the flood, but it would seem from Sir John Maundeville's account of the Church of St. Catherine, which existed at his time in the vicinity of Mount Sinai, that ravens, choughs, and crows have emulated the example of the dove, and carried olive branches to God-fearing people. This Church of St. Catherine, we are told, marks the spot where God revealed himself to Moses in the burning bush. And in it there were many lamps kept burning. The reason of this Maundeville thus explains, for they han of oil of olives now both for to bring in here lampies, and to it also, and that plenty have they be the miracle of God. For the ravens and crows and the choughs, and other fowls of the country assembling them there every year once, and flying thither as in pilgrimage, and every one of them bringeth a branch of the bays or of olive, in their beaks, instead of offering, and leave them there. Of the which the monks make great plenty of oil, and this is a great marvel. The ancients entertained a strong belief that birds were gifted with the knowledge of herbs, and that just as the woodpecker and hoopoe sought out the springwort, wherewith to remove obstructions, so other birds made use of certain herbs which they knew possessed valuable medicinal or curative properties. Thus Aristotle, Pliny, Dioscorides, and the old herbalists and botanical writers, all concur in stating that swallows were in the habit of plucking celandine, Chelidonium, and applying it to the eyes of their young, because, as Gerard tells us, with this herb the dams restore sight to their young ones when their eyes be put out. W. Coles, fully accepting the fact as beyond cavil, thus moralizes upon it: it is known to such as have skill of nature what wonderful care she takes of the smallest creatures, giving to them a knowledge of medicine to help themselves, if haply diseases annoy them. The swallow cureth her dim eyes with celandine, the weasel knoweth well the virtue of herb grace, the dove the vervain, the dog dischargeth his maw with a kind of grass, and too long it were to reckon up all the medicines which the beasts are known to use by nature's direction only. The same writer, in his Adam and Eden, tells us that the euphrasia, or eyebright, derived its English name from the fact of its being used by linnets and other birds to clear their sight. Says he, diverse authors write that goldfinches, linnets, and some other birds make use of this herb for the repairing of their young one's sight. The purple and yellow spots and stripes which are upon the flowers of eyebright very much resemble the diseases of the eyes, or bloodshot. Apuleius tells us that the eagle, when he wishes to soar high and scan far and wide, plucks a wild lettuce, and expressing the juice, rubs with it his eyes, which in consequence become wonderfully clear and far-seeing. The hawk, for a similar purpose, was thought to employ the hawk-bit, or hawkweed, hieraceum. Pigeons and doves, not to be behind their traditional enemy, discovered that vervain possessed the power of curing dimness of vision, and were not slow to use it with that object, hence the plant obtained the name of pigeon's grass. Geese were thought to help their diseases, with Galium aperine, called on that account goosegrass, and they are said to sometimes feed on the Potentilla ansarina, or goose tansy. On the other hand, they were so averse to the herb known to the ancients as Cenomycon, that they took to flight the moment they spied it. There is an old tradition of a certain life-giving herb, which was known to birds, and a story is told of how one day an old man watched two birds fighting till one was overcome. In an almost exhausted state it went and ate of a certain herb, and then returned to the onslaught. When the old man had observed this occur several times, he went and plucked the herb which had proved so valuable to the little bird. And when at last it came once more in search of the life-giving plant, and found it gone, it uttered a shrill cry, and fell down dead. The name of the herb is not given, but the story has such a strong family likeness to that narrated by Forestus, in which the goat's rue is introduced, that, probably, galega is the life-giving herb referred to. The story told by Forestus is as follows: a certain old man once taking a walk by the bank of a river, saw a lizard fighting with a viper, so he quietly lay down on the ground, that he might the better witness the fight without being seen by the combatants. The lizard, being the inferior in point of strength, was speedily wounded by a very powerful stroke from the viper, so much so, that it lay on the turf as if dying. But shortly recovering itself, it crept through the rather long grass, without being noticed by the viper, along the bank of the river, to a certain herb, goat's rue, growing there nigh at hand. The lizard, having devoured it, regained at once its former strength, and returning to the viper, attacked it in the same way as before, but was wounded again from receiving another deadly blow from the viper. Once more the lizard secretly made for the herb, to regain its strength, and being revived, it again engaged with its dangerous enemy, but in vain, for it experienced the same fate as before. Looking on, the old man wondered at the plant not less than at the battle, and in order to try if the herb possessed other hidden powers, he pulled it up secretly, while the lizard was engaged afresh with the viper. The lizard, having been again wounded, returned towards the herb, but not being able to find it in its accustomed place, it sank exhausted and died. Numerous plants have had the names of birds given to them, either from certain peculiarities in their structure resembling birds, or because they form acceptable food for the feathered race. Thus the cock's comb is so called from the shape of its calyx, the cock's foot, from the form of its spike, and the cock's head, the sainfoin, from the shape of the legume. The crane's bill and the heron's bill both derive their names from the form of their respective seed vessels. The guinea hen, Fritillaria meleagris, has been so called from its petals being spotted like this bird. The pheasant's eye, Adonis autumnalis, owes its name to its bright red corolla and dark center, the sparrow tongue, the knotgrass, to its small acute leaves, and the lark's spur, heel, toe, or claw, delphinium, to its projecting nectary. Chickweed and duckweed have been so called from being favorite food for poultry. The crow has given its name to a greater number of plants than any other bird. The ranunculus is the Chironopus or crow foot of Dioscorides, the Geranium pratense is the crowfoot crane's bill, the Lotus corniculatus is called crow toes, the daffodil and the bluebell both bear the name of crow bells, the Empetrum nigrum is the crowberry, Allium vine ale is crow garlic, Scilla nutans, crow leeks, and the Scandix pecten. Crow needles. The hen has a few plants named after it, the greater and lesser hen bits, Lamium amplexicol and Veronica heterofolia, the hen's foot, Caucalis daucoides, so called from the resemblance of its leaves to a hen's claw, and henbane, which seems to have derived its name from the baneful effects its seeds have upon poultry. Plants connected with animals. The ass has named after it the ass parsley, Ethusa sinapium, and the ass's foot. The colt's foot, Tussilago farfara. William Coles says that, if the ass be oppressed with melancholy, he eats of the hierosplenian or milt waste, and eases himself of the swelling of the spleen. D.C. Franciscus Paulini has given, in an old work, an account of 3 asses he met in Westphalia, which were in the habit of intoxicating themselves by eating white henbane and nightshade. These 4-footed drunkards, when in their cups, strayed to a pond, where they pulled themselves together with a dip and a draught of water. The same author relates another story. A miller of Thuringia had brought meal with his 9 asses into the next district. Having accepted the hospitality of some boon companions, he left his long-eared friends to wander around the place and to feed from the hedgerows and public roads. There they chanced to find a quantity of thistles that had been cut, and other food mixed with hemlock, and at once devoured the spoil greedily and confidently. At dusk, the miller, rising to depart, was easily detained by his associates, who cried out that the road was short, and that the moon, which had risen, would light him better than any torch. Meanwhile, the asses, feeling the hemlock's power in their bodies, fell down on the public road, being deprived of all motion and sensation. At length, about midnight, the miller came to his asses, and thinking them to be asleep, lashed them vigorously. But they remained motionless, and apparently dead. The miller, much frightened, now besought assistance from the country folks. But they were all of one opinion, that the asses were dead, and that they should be skinned the next day, when the cause of such a sudden death could be inquired into. "Come," said he, "if they are dead, why should I worry myself about them? Let them lie. We can do no good. Come, my friends, let us return into the inn, tomorrow you will be my witnesses." Meanwhile the skinners were called, and, after looking at the asses, one of them said, "Do you wish, miller, that we should take their skins off? Or would you be disposed, if we restored the beasts to life, to give us a handsome reward? You see they are quite in our power. Say what you wish, and it shall be done, miller." "Here is my hand," replied the miller, "and I pledge my word that I will give you what you wish, if you restore them to life." The skinner, smiling, caught hold of the whip, and lashing the beasts with all his might, roused all from their lethargic condition. The rustics were confounded. "Oh! You foolish fellows!" said he, "look at this herb," showing them some hemlock, "how profusely it grows in this neighborhood. Do you not know that hemlock causes asses to fall into a profound sleep?" The rustics, flocking together under a lime tree, as rustics do, made there and then a law that whosoever should discover, in field or garden, or anywhere else, that noxious plant, he should pluck it quickly, in order that men and beasts might be injured by it no more. The bear has given its name to several English plants. The Primula auricula, on account of the shape of its leaves, is called bear's ears. The Helleborus foetidus, for a similar reason, is known as bear's foot. Mium athamenticum is bear's wort, Allium ursinum, bear's garlic, and Arctostaphylos uva ursi, bear's berry, or bear's bilberry, the 3 last plants being favorite food of bears. The acanthus used at one time to be called bear's breech, but the name has for some unaccountable reason been transferred to the cow parsnip, Heracleum spondilium. In Italy the name of Branca orsina is given to the acanthus. This plant was considered by Dioscorides a cure for burns. Pliny says that bear's grease had the same property. De Gubernatis states that two Indian plants, the Argyria argentea and the Batatas paniculata, bear Sanskrit names signifying odor pleasing to bears. The bull has given its name to some few plants. Tussilago farfara, generally called coltsfoot, is also known as bull's foot. Centaurea nigra is bull's weed, Verbascum thapsus is bullock's lungwort. Having been so denominated on account of its curative powers, suggested, on the doctrine of signatures, by the similarity of its leaf to the shape of a dewlap. The purple and the pale spadices of Arum maculatum are sometimes called bulls and cows. The great daisy is ox eye, the Primula elatior, ox lip, the Helminthia echioides, ox tongue, and the Helleborus foetidus, ox heel. The Antirrhinum and Arum maculatum are, from their resemblance in shape, respectively known as calf's snout and calf's foot. Cats have several representative plants. From its soft flower heads, the Nephalium dioicum is called cat's foot. From the shape of its leaves, the Hypocyrus maculata is known as cat's ear. The ground ivy, also from the shape of its leaves, is cat's paw. Two plants are known as cat's tail, viz., Typho latifolia and Phleum pratense. Euphorbia helioscopia, on account of its milky juice, is cat's milk, and, lastly, Nepeta cataria is denominated catmint, because, as Gerard informs us in his Herbal, cats are very much delighted herewith, for the smell of it is so pleasant unto them, that they rub themselves upon it, and wallow or tumble in it, and also feed on the branches very greedily. We are also told by another old writer that cats are amazingly delighted with the root of the plant valerian. So much so, that, enticed by its smell, they at once run up to it, lick it, kiss it, jump on it, roll themselves over it, and exhibit almost uncontrollable signs of joy and gladness. There is an old rhyme on the liking of cats for the plant marum, which runs as follows. If you set it, the cats will eat it, if you sow it, the cats will know it. The cow has given its name to a whole series of plants. Its berry is Vaccinium vitis idea, its cress Lepidium campestre, its parsley or weed, Carophyllum sylvestre, its parsnip, Heracleum spondylium, its wheat, Melampyrum. The quaking grass, Brisa media, is known as cow quake, from an idea that cattle are fond of it, and the water hemlock, Cicuta virosa, has the opprobrious epithet of cow bane applied to it, from its supposed baneful effect upon oxen. The Primula veris is the cowslip. In Norway is to be found the herb ossifrage, a kind of reed which is said to have the remarkable power of softening the bones of animals. So much so, that if oxen eat it, their bones become so soft that not only are the poor beasts rendered incapable of walking, but they can even be rolled into any shape. They are not said to die, however. Fortunately, they can be cured, if the bones are exhibited to them of another animal killed by the eating of this plant. It is most wonderful, however, that the inhabitants make a medicine for cementing bones from this very herb. There are several plants dedicated to man's faithful friend. Dog's bane, Opossum, is a very curious plant. Its bell-shaped flowers entangle flies who visit the flower for its honey juice, so that in August, when full blown, the corolla is full of their dead bodies. Although harmless to some persons, yet it is noxious to others, poisoning and creating swellings and inflammations on certain people who have only trod on it. Gerard describes it as a deadly and dangerous plant, especially to four-footed beasts, for, as Dioscorides writes, the leaves hereof, mixed with bread, and given, kill dogs, wolves, foxes, and leopards. Dog's chamomile, Matricaria chamomilla, is a spurious or wild kind of chamomile. Dog grass, Triticum caninum, is so called because dogs take it medicinally as an aperient. Dog's mercury, or dog's coal, is a poisonous kind, so named to distinguish it from English mercury. Dog's nettle is Galeopsis tetrahit. Dog's arch, Chenopodium vulvaria, is a stinking kind. Dog's parsley, Ethusa sinapium, a deleterious weed, also called fool's parsley and lesser hemlock. Dog rose, Rosa canina, is the common wilding or canker rose. The ancients supposed the root to cure the bite of a mad dog, it having been recommended by an oracle for that purpose, hence the Romans called it canina, and Pliny relates that a soldier who had been bitten by a mad dog, was healed with the root of this shrub, which had been indicated to his mother in a dream. Dog's tail grass, Cynosurus cristatus, derives its name from its spike being fringed on one side only. Dog violet, Viola canina, is so called contemptuously because scentless. Dog's tongue, or hound's tongue, Cynoglossum officinale, derived its name from the softness of its leaf, and was reputed to have the magical property of preventing the barking of dogs if laid under a person's feet. Dog wood, Cornus sanguinea, is the wild cornel, and dog bears the fruit of that herb, which was also formerly called hound's tree. Dr. Pryor thinks that this name has been misunderstood, and that it is derived from the Old English word dag, or dagger, which was applied to the wood because it was used for skewers by butchers. The ancient Greeks knew a plant, supposed to be a species of Antirrhinum, which they called Cynocephalia, dog's head, as well as Osiris, and to this plant Pliny ascribes extraordinary properties. As a rule, the word dog, when applied to any plant, implies contempt. After the fox has been named, from its shape, the Alopecuris pratensis, foxtail grass, and the digitalis has been given the name of foxglove. The goat has its weed, Aegopodium podagraria, and has given its name to the Tragopagon pratensis, which, on account of its long, coarse pappus, is called goat's beard. Caprifolium, or goat's leaf, is a specific name of the honeysuckle, given to it by the old herbalists, because the leaf, or more properly the stem, climbs and wanders over high places where goats are not afraid to tread. A species of sow thistle, the Sonchus oleracea, is called the hare's palace, from a superstitious notion that the hare derives shelter and courage from it. Gerard calls it the hare's lettuce, a name given to it by Apuleius. Because, when the hare is fainting with heat or fatigue, she recruits her failing strength with it. Dr. Pryor gives the following extracts from old authors respecting this curious tradition. Anthony Ascombe says, "If a hare eat of this herb in summer, when he is mad, he shall be whole." Topsell also tells us in his Natural History, page 209, that, when hares are overcome with heat, they eat of an herb called Lactuca leporina, that is, the hare's lettuce, hare's house, hare's palace, and there is no disease in this beast, the cure whereof she does not seek for in this herb. This plant is sometimes called hare's thistle. Buplurum rotundifolium is termed hare's ear, from the shape of its leaves, as is also Erysimum oriental. Trifolium arvense is hare's foot, from the soft gray down which surrounds the blossoms resembling the delicate fur of the hare's foot. Both Ligurus auratus, and the flowering rush, Eriophorum vaginatum, are called hare's tail, from the soft downy inflorescence. Melolotus officinalis is heart's clover. Scalopendrium vulgar, heart's tongue, Plantigo coronapus, heart's horn, Serpus caspitosus, deer's or heart's hair, Rhamnus catharticus, heart's or buckthorn, Spina cervina, and Tordillium maximum, heartwort, so called because, as Dioscorides tells us, the juice of the leaves was given to roes in order that they might speedily be delivered of their young. According to Pliny, the Roman matrons used to employ it for the same purpose, having been taught by hens that eat it to speed their delivery. As Aristotle did declare it before. The raspberry is still sometimes called by its ancient name of hindberry, and the Teucrium scoridonia is known as hindheel, from an old tradition that it cures deer when bitten by venomous serpents. The dittany is said to have the same extraordinary effect on wounded hearts as upon goats. Numerous indeed are the plants named after the horse, either on account of the use they are put to, the shape of their foliage, etc., their large size, or the coarseness of their texture. Inula helenium is horseheel, a name attached to the plant by a double blunder of inula for hinula, a colt, and helenium, for heel or heel, employed to heal horses of sore heels, etc. Vicia faba is the horse bean. Teucrium comadres, the germander, is called horse chire, from its springing up after horse droppings. Melampyrum sylvaticum is the horse flower, so called from a verbal error. The Alexandrian laurel was formerly called horse tongue. Tussilago farfara, from the shape of its leaf, is termed horse hoof. Centaurea nigra is horse knob. Another name for colt's foot is horse foot, and we have horse thistle, mint, mushroom, parsley, thyme, and radish. The Dutch rush, equisetum, is called horse tail, a name descriptive of its shape. Hippocrepus camosa is known as the horseshoe vetch, from the shape of the legumes, and, lastly, the Enanth philandrium is the horse bane, because, in Sweden, it is supposed to give horses the palsy. In Mexico, the rattle grass is said to instantly kill horses who unfortunately eat it. The Indians call the oleander horse's death, and they name several plants after different parts of the horse. In connection with horses, we must not forget to mention the moonwort, which draws the nails out of the horse's shoes, and of which Culpeper writes, "Moonwort is an herb which they say will open locks and unshow such horses as tread upon it. This some laugh to scorn, and those no small fools neither, but country people that I know, call it unshow the horse." Besides, I have heard commanders say that on White Down, in Devonshire, near Tiverton, there were found 30 horseshoes, pulled off from the Earl of Essex's horses, being then drawn up in a body, many of them being newly shod, and no reason known, which caused much admiration, and the herb described usually grows upon heaths. In Italy, the herb sfericavallo is deemed to have the power of unshowing horses out at pasture. The mouse-ear, or herba clavorum, is reputed to prevent blacksmiths hurting horses when being shod. Growing in damp places, haunted by toads croaking and piping to one another, the Equisetum limosum, with its straight, fistulous stalks, has obtained the name of toad pipe. The Linaria vulgaris, from its narrow flax-like leaves, is known as toad flax, from a curious mistake of the old herbalists who confounded the Latin words bubo and bufo. Frogs claim as their especial plants the frog bit, Morsus renee, so called because frogs are supposed to eat it, frog's lettuce, Potamogeton densis. Frog grass, Salicornia herbacea, and frog foot, a name originally assigned to the vervain, the leaf of which somewhat resembles a frog's foot, but now transferred to the duck meat, lemna. Bees are recognized in the Delphinium grandiflorum, or B. larkspur, the Galeopsis tetrahit, or B. nettle, the Ophrys apifera, or B. orchis, and the Daucus carota, or bee's nest. Thus ends Chapter 12 of Plant Lore, Legends and Lyrics. Up next is Chapter 13, The Doctrine of Plant Signatures.